Okay, so this chapters this week were I felt kind of in between. Like we were talking about something new, but I swear he used some of the same imagery he used earlier when like some of the same stories as examples. And I don't know if it was just me remembering other things I read or possibly because I was reading this like 2 weeks ago and then reread it that maybe it was that, but yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. But some of these anecdotes that he relays are like I swear I've read this before
I agree. I
elsewhere.
think he does refer to them more than once in the book.
Like the boat thing, right? Alright, we'll get there when we get there. It's a great little story. But uh so this chapter 23 was about the five aggregates, or the skandhas, form, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, and he goes into detail what they're referring to, but also how they are connected and how, just like most of the other lists that we've gone through, all of them are contained within one. Like one is in all, and how you can't separate these things out. They sort of seem superficially to be separate, but they all influence each other and are a part of each other. And not only within us, but in society as a whole as well. So society can kind of form all of these things on top of that. So we have to be mindful of both how these operate within ourselves and also how they operate outside of ourselves and then influence. Um, I swear I highlighted things here, but they're not highlighted. Anyway, I guess the more important ones are down here. Let's see what we had. Uh, a lot of reminders of things that we have been, like we had gone over in detail in previous chapters. So looking deeply into your feelings, and we can again how they're connected. The roots being in our body, our perceptions, and our deep consciousness, and that we can identify the nutriments that have brought them into being. Any kind of deep feelings that we have, and understanding them means that we can kind of. Oh, I don't think I highlighted it, but I liked the way he talked about kind of controlling, but not in the sense of like I think he's very clear that it's not necessarily something you want to control, suppress, you let them live freely, but as if ourselves were like an ocean that also had sea monsters in it, and they're contained within, and you have to learn how to let them live in a way that isn't harmful, but they're still there. And that was kind of an interesting way to think about it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like this bit about the aggregate of perception, that it includes noticing, naming, and conceptualizing, as well as the perceiver and the perceived, and that the perceiver and the perceived are inseparable. That if you perceive wrongly, then the things perceived are also incorrect. But because we perceive phenomena on the basis of our lack of insight into the nature of impermanence and interbeing, which kind of means there's just always going to be inaccuracies in perception, which means everything that's perceived will also be inaccurate, and that we have to, be aware of that or be deceived. Then we went back to the watering the seeds in our store consciousness and keeping dormant the ones that we don't want to spread. And I think in this, he added somewhere, maybe I did a bad job highlighting this week, but added that, like with real seeds, when you water them and they grow, they produce more. So they can spread their seeds, so it will kind of proliferate, and that we should be extra careful with what we are watering or what we're
Mm-hmm.
allowing others to water, because that will spread not just as that plant grows, but also, going into there will be more and more of those seeds and easier and more dangerous to have that watered in the future. But we have to be extra conscious about what we are doing with the seeds of our consciousness. Mm. Yeah, and again, the collective made of the individual, and the individual is made of the collective, and reminding that it is essential to have a Sangha to produce such a transformation in the self, because it's not just an individual. So the transformation has to happen kind of all around to be effective. What else do we have in this chapter? Just like really elaborating on that thought. Yeah, that they have our roots in society, in nature, and in the people with whom we live. That was all I kind of. That's my summary for the chapter, but those are my highlights. Did anyone have anything else in it that kind of stood out or want to talk about?
Not super specifically. I just enjoyed the parts where it felt like the reemphasis on transforming moments in your thoughts to wisdom, I think he puts it, on how with the meditation and mindfulness you can take something and make it meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like these aggregates are kind of, I want to say, almost superfluous, as in, or in, maybe there's just too much of them, because I mean, I feel like in the end there is only the mind that we can observe, because after all, the mind produces the picture of the world that our consciousness can then perceive. So I feel like everything is just mental formations, so to speak.
I think there was actually a little bit where he mentioned that, right? That I don't know where it is. Something about, there are different, some are parts like sort of subcategories of mental formations, but because they're important, they've been named separately.
Yeah, I remember that bit, but I think that was about feelings and thoughts. Probably at least feelings were in that subcategory,
Mhm.
but yeah.
And the
Anyway,
consciousness, yeah, the mental formations are like coming from what's being awakened in our consciousness, right? What is being watered in the consciousness becomes a mental formation. So I guess for me, the way I understood it was like consciousness is all of the potential. It's all of the things that are within us, but they're not always active. And mental formations are more active. Like it's something that's happening right now. You're having like it's something at present. You can have a mental formation, which also, yes, it comes from perceptions and maybe influenced by feelings and all of those things that come together. But that the mental formation was kind of the just the current state of something from the consciousness. So that
It's
like
like the
everything's
product of the
connected.
mind.
Yeah. It's what's come to the surface right now, but they kind of come and go, and they're more versus like distinction being the consciousness is the stuff that's always there, whether or not you're expressing it or not, and the mental formations are just passing thoughts and things that we should be careful not to identify with them because they're not really us, but they're sort of that more surface, right? That's how I understood it, the way he was describing. But yeah, they don't need to be 5, right?
I mean, all.
If I recall correctly, the skandhas were far more important when there was a lot of dispute over which was the true interpretation, among the Vedic schools. And the skandhas were used as an argument in Buddhism to show that we are in fact empty. There is no Atman, as they say in Hinduism, because you cannot find the self in any of the aggregates that we call the self.
Hmm.
So it's more of a doctrinal argument, I think, at least in the context I've learned of it. But it is also very useful for demonstrating, yes, you are empty. And all of these things we call the self, can you find the self? No.
That makes
But
sense too.
I do think it can be a little overcomplicated, as Ben said, where, just mental formations alone is enough to understand, well, this is my experience. I am the experiencer, not the experience itself. Therefore, I am the consciousness. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I said, like most of the lists that have been separated out in this entire book and other places in Buddhist text, it does really seem like they're not distinct and separate concepts. They're maybe named to help to understand that specific focus or that occurrence a little bit more easily, but they're not really separate.
Well, when everything is one, how could it be?
Right. Well, and it makes a little sense to have something like form, okay, that we're talking about sense organs, the nervous system, like a physical state, which obviously informs a mental one, and the way you perceive things and all, the actual input from your eyes and your nose and all of that. But we can see maybe more clearly that, form is more different from mental formations, but then they're still linked together, and awareness of form can't happen without the other parts and things like that. So, but that's why I just always feel like, okay, we have another list of things, and then the list of things is actually just quite simple, and it's not a list of things, it's just a concept that has been explained in parts. Kind of how I'm seeing it. It does feel really silly reading all different parts of Buddhism and being like, oh, there's so many lists, but the lists are all the same thing, and they're all, you know. Same thing with the chapter 24 was like that as well. Where the 5 powers all relate to each other, or 5 faculties and their 5 powers are also literally the same things. So if we move on to that chapter, though, this one had a lot of reminders as well of just like how we can return to the home in ourselves, remembering to water the seeds of paradise in ourselves, and touching happiness in the present moment. Listing the 5 faculties and powers of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and insight, or energy also called diligence. Kind of, this one's the same thing too. It's kind of like just a flow of things rather than distinct different parts of it, but saying like faith is having the confidence in the path, and diligence is the energy that makes it feel worthwhile or makes you want to continue to practice because you believe that it's going to do something good for you or that it's beneficial in some way. Now you have diligence. Mindfulness is the tool to cultivate insight. And then the insight is kind of what leads you to have the faith as well. So it's just a loop of steps that happen over and over. I like this, the reminder again that everything is always present in us. It's just a matter of what we're allowing to like bloom and come forth. That even if you want to say that you're not angry, but anger is still there in the unconscious. If you get rid of all your unwholesome seeds, you won't have anything to practice. We need to practice now with all the unwholesome seeds in us. If we don't, the negative seeds will grow and cause a great deal of suffering. You can't really expect to, and shouldn't even try really to get rid of them, but instead focus on what you can control, which is to water the wholesome seeds.
Yeah.
I also like this word continuity that he has here. If you want wholesome seeds to be in your mind consciousness, you need the condition of continuity. And again, that one seed will sow more wholesome seeds in you, that they will proliferate. Oh, here I didn't highlight this, but he kind of had a little story about the Buddha nature and the Buddha being in all of us, like we all have the seed, and to remind people that they have that potential and remind ourselves to see that everybody has that same seed. Some people just don't know how to water it or haven't had others help them to water it. We can help others to awaken just as much as ourselves. Yeah, this one was, I think actually that was a lot of it. It's just learning how to do, reminding that we can come back to ourselves, that we can have, like, find joy within ourselves in the present moment. And if we do that, we will also be able to spread it to others. Every moment is an opportunity to water the seeds of happiness in yourself. If you develop the capacity to be happy in any surroundings, you will be able to share your happiness with others. When you realize your own capacity to be happy anywhere, you can put down the roots in the present moment. You can take whatever the conditions of the present moment are and make them the foundation of your life and your happiness. Good sum up. This red bit, though, this was a footnote, so it's not elaborated, but saying the 3 kinds of pride are 1, thinking I'm better than others, 2, thinking I am worse than others, and 3, thinking I am just as good as others. I love
What's
this.
left?
Just stop comparing yourself with others, right? Like at this point, we always think of pride as just number 1, but
Yeah.
if you're comparing yourself with others, then it is a form of pride. Is essentially, I guess. It's like, hey, don't do that. I kind of I think it would have been interesting to have that, to actually elaborate on that instead of just commenting that thinking you're worse than others is also a kind of pride and then moving on. Yeah, you might have an inferiority complex, which is the second kind of pride, and then just continue. But I like that thought.
It
That's a
is
good
something
thought.
to think about for sure.
Mm. Oh, this image is nice too. It's talking about you finding a beautiful rose in a well-tended garden, and that it has thorns, so you have to know how to pick it, so that to touch that beauty, you have to understand the pain that can come around it and be careful to either to address them, to avoid them. You have to know how to handle it, otherwise you won't be as successful. And also thinking that just because they're thorns doesn't mean that you can't be happy, that you can't pick the rose. You just have to understand how to do it properly. And you have to know how to deal with your anger and sadness so you don't lose the flowers of joy. I love his images. Okay, that's the rest of it. Then the good question to remind ourselves: how can we live so that the seeds of happiness in us are watered every day, no matter what is happening around us? It's a really good question to ask, I think.
Yes, essentially self-care.
Hmm. And then, as always, I also thought the final paragraph of the chapter was a really good summation of everything so far, saying it isn't necessary to run away or abandon our present home and look for an illusory home, a so called paradise that is really just a shadow of happiness. When we produce faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and insight in our power plants, we realize that our true home is already filled with light and power. The true home being in ourselves.
Ooh. Yeah.
I live in my me.
Yes. Did I miss anything that anybody else wanted to discuss?
No.
No. They're good
No.
chapters. I'm sorry I'm not contributing a lot. I'm very tired. I've been packing all morning.
That is okay. But it was kind of repetitive again too, right? We
Hmm.
say here are separate things that all kind of are mushed together, and we're just making them distinct for explanation purposes, but they're all the same kinds of thing, and they all are
Hmm.
connected to each other. And if we're
Yeah.
doing this right, we'll remember all these things we talked about in previous chapters, and we'll be able to touch those. And um, I
On
think not.
Buddhism is never repetitive.
No. Yeah, not a lot new, but also all good stuff. So, yay lists. I felt like there were so many good descriptions in here, but that everything seemed to take so long to, like, I felt myself wanting to take, certain quotes or paragraphs and be like, yes, this is a thing. Like, people should hear that. Like, I want to share this. And then when I read it and I go, it's kind of too referential to the other thing.
Yeah. They're tied
But
into all
then,
the other stuff, and really, then you're like, well, if you would just read this chapter and then come back to this, you would get it.
yeah, like first, oh, can I send this one paragraph? How about that and the one preceding it? How about the whole chapter? Mm. On the other hand, though, sometimes I do think that all it takes for some people is just reading like one sentence that makes them just put their thinking in that direction, right? Or
Spontaneous
like,
enlightenment.
mm,
That's all you need.
mm-hmm.
Get enlightened
Just
immediately.
get good.
Yeah. Dang. Buddhism should rebrand and just be like, get good
The path of get good.
to reach
Get
all of the
good.
youth.
That's actually not counter to what some of what Thich Nhat Hanh had been doing.
Right.
Like, hey, how do we talk about this in a language that people can understand in modern times? Because it was written, like, a lot of this was written a really long time ago, and people don't live the same kind of lifestyle that they used to. So now we have to help them to understand for the current lifestyle that all of this just still applies, and maybe is more important than ever. So maybe calling it get good is actually okay.
Perfect. We've condensed all of Buddhism down to 2 words.
Get good.
We've done it. We've solved Buddhism.
Hooray!
Yay!
Good job, everyone.